Hey guys, so today I want to show you how to make an adorable double-sided folding landscape. You can call it a card, you can call it a zine, but whatever you call it, these are really fun to make. They are a great way to explore cartooning and atmospheric perspective techniques, and they're a really fun way to create a landscape. Hey there, art nerds. So today we are doing an art project. This one is kind of interesting, and this was requested by my supervisor with the St. Charles Parish Art Lab. So what we're going to be doing today is we are going to be creating a landscape, but kind of in a zine format. And this is something that she saw on TikTok, other artists doing. So it is not a concept that I came up with, but since they want me to teach it for the July Art Lab, I figured I could figure this out. So since I have to prep it anyway and take photos and make a presentation, I figured that I would share that process with you guys. So I have given this a lot of thought because while I make zines and while I make mini comics a lot and I do like folded paper stuff, I don't super love landscapes, and I sure have tried. So it did take some thinking to kind of figure out how I wanted to go about it. It also took creating some mock-ups. So this one is to demonstrate kind of how we might lay this out with the sky, the background, the middle ground, and the foreground. And then this one is to kind of demonstrate what side of the paper each layer would be on. So you're going to want to work on a paper that you can use both sides of, ideally a heavier paper. So I'm going to be using Canson XL for this project. So we are basically starting with a long triangle. And for this, I'm actually going to be using the long side of our 9x12. So it's gonna be a little bit longer than what I have here. And the yellow side marks the front, the blue side marks the back. It doesn't really matter. It's just to give a visual for how the layers are going to handle. I'm going to be doing most of this in time lapse because I'm going to be figuring things out as I go. I'm going to be making mistakes as I go. I'm going to be learning as I go. This is the demo, so it may not be perfect. I did make some notes about different kinds of projects, like a beach scene or like cows and wildflowers and trees and hills and sky. I did notice that if you want a softer transition, if you don't want to see as much of each layer for whatever reason, you would do a thinner, longer triangle. And if you want a harsher transition where you see more of the sky, background, middle ground, and foreground, you would do a harsher transition. So I think the more you play around with the size of your triangle and the proportions of your triangle, the more differences you're going to find. I'm going to keep my first one. I may do two, I may not. I'm going to keep my first one pretty simple, but I would love to do one with cutouts. I think that would be a really, really cute idea. But I do think that might be biting off a little bit more than we can chew this time, because for this art lab, I will be teaching a short class on landscapes and atmospheric perspective and then segue into this project. So it really means I don't have a lot of time to cover either. Speaking of, I will not really be covering landscapes today. I have talked about them a lot here on the channel. I have a lot of videos, I have a lot of resources, I have a lot of tutorials where I talk about drawing your own landscapes, drawing your own backgrounds, working from reference for those sort of things. So please do check the descriptions down below. Today I'm working with the longer side of 9x12 watercolor paper. If you would like a taller or a wider or a longer landscape zine, you can work with a larger sheet of paper. I figured I want about 5.5 inches on the 9-inch side, and then I drew a diagonal line going all the way to 12, on the long side. And then I just kind of eyeballed it while folding it. I didn't mind having this little tail. I didn't need it to be perfect. And I wanted to try going in both directions just to see how that would handle. This is something that you can kind of play around with to kind of figure out what you like about it. So I wanted to kind of figure out how I wanted to lay out my landscape and what side of the paper it would be on. And you can see that we have different layers on different sides of the paper. This is why it's important to work on a double-sided paper. This is also to help demonstrate. The yellow is the front, and then the blue stripe is the back. And then when you fold it, you can kind of get an idea, depending on how you fold it, for how these layers are going to come together. This was just to help give me a better idea of how this would work, because I was having some trouble kind of mentally grasping how I wanted to lay this out and how I wanted to structure it. So since I am working on a 180-pound watercolor paper, it is a heavier paper, and as you guys can see, it doesn't want to stay folded. So the first thing I'm going to do is kind of use, so my sketchbook is off to the side. I have a thumbnail sketch there. And I'm going to start lightly sketching in the different elements that I want. So the very first layer, the little tail there, is going to be a cat. Then it's going to be cows. Then it's going to be wildflowers. Then it's going to be trees and rolling hills. And then it's going to be mountains. You can use whatever kind of landscapes you like. I did find that hills and mountains, those kind of landscapes actually work really well for the layout of this little landscape zine, but you can kind of play around with it and try out different things. I had students who did a really cool undersea theme, and one of them did a really neat space theme where it started on Earth and it went all the way into outer space. So really, your imagination is the only limit. I also had students who kind of just to kind of understand how this was done, used mine as heavy reference and worked from there. So if you need to like use this as reference and kind of copy what I'm doing to kind of understand what's going on, please feel free to do that. I'll try to make sure I include those resources over on my Patreon. So I wanted to also try out doing a beach one. I never finished this one because I actually never decided if I wanted to cut this one out the way I end up doing with the other two zines. So this one is still sitting unfinished. If you guys would like to see me finish the beach themed one, let me know in the comments below, and maybe I can make that happen. But this one also had like people in it and like sandcastles. It was a little bit more involved than the two other landscapes that I did. And for these, I really want to play with a sense of scale and proportion and overlap. And if you are interested, as I mentioned earlier, in learning more about designing backgrounds, designing environments, designing landscapes, and understanding how to break these down, I have some great videos on drawing backgrounds for comics and for storytelling, as well as drawing backgrounds for like understanding atmospheric perspective. So I did this the wrong way. I'm doing a very slight score, not cutting all the way through. I should have done it on the outside of the hinge instead of the inside of the hinge, and that would open the hinge up more to allow for folding and let it fold flat a little bit better. I'm also using a bone folder to really score those creases, get them nice and crispy. And something else I ended up doing with these, since I ended up scoring them on the wrong side, was storing them underneath heavy books for a while to try and flatten them out, and utilizing Chinese watercolor weights to kind of help press them down. So here is my sketch, very lightly sketched in pencil, so you can see the different layers. And one of the tricks, because we're trying to create the illusion of perspective, and as things recede into the distance, they get smaller. So you would be able to see less detail, you would be able to see fewer things as we go further back into the distance, and that's something that I try to capture with these little zines. So now that I have it all sketched in, I am going to ink it. You don't have to ink it. You can finish this out however you like. It doesn't have to be in color, whatever works for you. But I'm going to ink it, and then I'm going to watercolor it. Before I get too far into that, I also have my pencil handy. So I'm going to kind of clean up and add in details, reference things now that I've got like the base sketch and where I want everything kind of figured out. I'm going to kind of switch between tightening up my details, tightening up my layers in pencil, and then going ahead and inking it. And with the cows, I am referencing cows, but I really wanted to very simplify the forms and to make it very silhouette-y so that they read at a distance. Now, I did end up painting my cows as little spotted cows, but you could just do black silhouettes, and that might be a little bit easier and read a little bit better for you. For this, I'm taking my time and I'm just, fixing things up and inking things layer by layer. Because this paper is so heavy and because it doesn't want to stay folded, I'm using Chinese watercolor weights to help hold it down. Any kind of paper weights that will just help, keep things in place while you're working should work for this. You could even probably use pebbles. With the trees, I kept things very simple. We have very basic lollipop style trees. I'm just adding a little bit of scalloping to the top and then a little bit of shading underneath. As we recede into the distance, my trees are getting smaller. So there's like several overlapping hills. My trees are getting smaller and I'm adding less detail to them. So I am keeping in mind scale, overlap, and detail for this. For the final background, it's just simple rolling, overlapping mountains with some clouds in the background. But as you guys can see, we are actually alternating what side of the paper it's going to be on. Another thing you could do is you could like create kind of a base book with the folds and then glue on the paper of your choice if you wanted really specific working qualities. It really depends on like how fancy you want to get with this. You could draw and paint on both sides and just like totally fill it in and have a double-sided book. That's up to you. So when painting this, I am now keeping in mind that with atmospheric perspective, warmer things, more saturated things, more detailed things are going to be in the foreground, closer to the viewer. And as we recede into the background, they are going to be cooler. They are going to be less saturated. They may be grayer. They're going to be less distinct. They're going to contain less detail. So the first thing, we have a lot of grass here. So I started with a really warm green for the kitty cat layer. So that would be an olive green. And then I did a sap green for the cow layer. For the wildflower layer, I'm going to go ahead and mask out my wildflowers, but this is going to be a slightly cooler bluer green, maybe a hooker's green. And then for the trees and rolling hills, I'm going to go with something like a viridian. So we're going to go cooler and bluer and less saturated as we go into the background. And I wanted to just kind of start blocking this in for me. So that's why I'm just painting the grass for each layer. It's kind of helping me figure out how I want to handle these things. And it's also kind of helping me decide whether or not I want to do shadows, how much detail I want to add for this, and how simple I want to leave this. As I mentioned earlier, you do not have to do this in watercolor. You can do this in whatever, you can do collage, you can do whatever medium you like. I just went with watercolor because it's one of my favorite, it's very economical, and it's what I use the most. So it was something that I knew I could do quickly for this class and effectively, and that I could achieve the effects I wanted without having to mess around too much with them. So that's why I went with watercolor, but whatever medium you're comfortable with. So for this, I actually did a little bit of overdrawing to connect it to the layer behind it. So I started painting the mountains and color matching those. what I ended up doing is I ended up cutting the background out so that we have like a cleaner overlap and we have like kind of a nicer transition. And you guys will see what I'm talking about in a minute. I just like that effect better. And that's what I did when I did the second folding card zine. So with the mountains, I decided to go shades of blue since we're working cooler and we're working less saturated. So I started with the lightest and least saturated mountains in the very background. And then as I'm working towards the foreground, I am going more saturated and also warmer, ending with an ultramarine blue. I also went ahead and masked out some clouds in masking fluid so that I could go ahead and paint the sky for this. And I think I went with like a phthalo blue for the sky, if you guys are curious. So now I have like my base colors kind of mocked in. I can start going in and adding in details. I'm painting like the shadows on the grass here with the cat. And I'm going to do a little black cat because I happen to really like black cats, and also because it will really stand out against this bright green grass. So for the cows, same thing, using a very fine brush. I'm just adding in some shadow of the same color, more saturated, that I used to paint the grass, but I don't want to add in too much detail because we're trying to recede into the background. And then I'm going to do little spotted cows. So they are white and black. I'm going to do kind of a tannish, creamy color for the white, and then I'm just going to do like a Payne's gray for the black spots, since they are not as saturated as the black cat. Same thing for the wildflowers. I am using Hooker's green, probably a little bit more saturated. This one is fun. So what I noticed is that towards the bottom of each layer, that's going to feel closer to the viewer when you actually open it up. So I am going to draw things a little larger and a little bit more detail. So every fold is a little mini exercise in atmospheric perspective. And then for the mountains in the background, I wanted to create kind of a misty effect. And I know some artists will do kind of a wash towards the bottom, so it looks like there's mist coming up from the bottom of the mountain. And I decided to bring that effect into this, and then dab in more saturated color at the top. It does complicate things a little bit. You absolutely do not have to do it. You may choose to paint teeny tiny little triangular pine trees on the closest mountains, just kind of whatever sparks joy for you and whatever you like. When the grass layer on my wildflowers dried, I went in with just some very basic yellows and reds and blues, those sort of colors. And in the foreground at the bottom, they're in more detail. And then towards the back, they just become little dots of color. So with this, you want to let a side dry before you start switching over. So that's what I was doing there. I painted the whole side and then I flipped it over. So now we're on the cow side and the tree side. I am painting the shadows underneath our lollipop trees with the same green I did for each. Like, actually, it might be the green from the hill behind, but it's basically a darker version of the hill that you see. So I have a lot of greens here. That's actually why I'm using the ceramic palette that I'm using today. Is I needed to mix up a lot of tiny amounts of, or many small amounts of color. There we go. And also keep it organized. For the trees, same thing. I'm starting with a Hooker's green for the trees, and then I'm going to be adding in a little bit more blue as we move further back. And I'm also going to be lightening it up just a little bit as we move further back. So that's one of the nice things about watercolor with this is as you move further back, you can just add more water to kind of desaturate your colors and create the look of atmospheric perspective. After everything dried, I decided I want to trim it so we don't like this well, you guys can see, right? You can use an X-Acto blade for this. Sjogren's has caused a lot of hand pain issues for me, so I'm just more comfortable using scissors, and I'm not even using great scissors here. You could get really like careful and fussy cut with these, and it would probably look great. I did a little bit of a halo cut around it, and it still looked really cute with this cartoony art style. And you also want to trim it kind of where it goes into the fold. And what this is going to do is kind of create a more seamless transition between your folds and layers. So you guys are actually going to see I'm going to cut out. At first I leave it, and then I decide to cut out that background mountain that I had added to the rolling trees so that we get kind of a cleaner transition into the mountains, if that makes sense. And also so that each layer kind of works on its own and looks pretty on its own. So here is the first of the 2 folding landscapes that I completed. I think this project is super cute. It's actually fairly easy once you just dive in and get started, and it's a lot of fun. So now we have a really cute little folding watercolor illustration that demonstrates some of the techniques of using atmospheric perspective. So we have our warmer colors closer to the viewer with these warmer greens, and the colors get cooler as we recede into the background. We also have, and to be fair, the cows should probably be a little bit bigger, or maybe I should have done the wildflowers here, but we also have like size getting smaller as we go further back into the background. We also have overlap to create this sense of distance. We also have colors getting fainter and lighter as we recede into the distance. So I think it's pretty cute. I'm glad I gave it a try. I'm not super sure what I'm going to do with this one, but it could be a really cute idea for a card, especially, or maybe even for some comic style storytelling. You could use this to tell a sequential story if you really wanted to. One thing I had considered was painting the underside too, to kind of have it create more of a scene. So that is an option that you have if that's, you know, something that's appealing to you. One thing that I did do, and I'm glad that I did it because I think it adds to it, is trimming the overlap. So instead of just painting it into the scene, actually trimming it so that we have that overlap. Could have used an X-Acto blade. It would have given me a cleaner cut on that. I used scissors. They're just a little bit easier for me. But you can use, I think, any media you like for something like this, as long as it doesn't rub like pastels might rub. I think this could be really cute for watercolor pencils or color pencils, maybe even crayon, and you could go even more cartoony with it. So just because I did it with watercolor does not mean you should feel like you need to. One other thing I would point out, you are working on both sides of the paper. So you do want to work with a paper that is workable on both sides. And that's why I went with Canson XL, because it is decently workable on both sides. Here's a demo folding landscape that I made while I was teaching the class on this landscape. I actually wanted to experiment with a different sort of proportion for our triangle. So long and narrow gives you a much shorter landscape than like a more acute sort of cut. So I've already sketched this in. We have like butterflies, bees, and wildflowers in the foreground. Then we have like a wildflower meadow. Then we have that wildflower meadow continuing at the bottom and trees. And then we have another mountain landscape. And I thought a sunset might be nice this time. The second project is very similar to the first, except I cut the hinges on the right side. You want to cut them on the outside, but even the theme is very similar. It's this one is more like butterflies, so that's what's going to be on the smaller fold here, but it's still very pastoral, nature, mountains, that sort of thing, keeping it simple. I was doodling this as a demonstration while in class, and I just decided that it'd be fun to kind of finish it up. So the process is basically the same. We're still keeping in mind the elements of atmospheric perspective, the most relevant, because this is in color. So we want to think warm to cool as we go from foreground to background. We want to think about scale. We want to think about overlap. Overlap can be a really big one here to kind of create that illusion of depth. And one of the things I really like about these cards, as you may have noticed, even as they kind of unfold, they still work visually because of how we designed the layers. So I think they're really cute for display as well. And you know, you can be more creative than I was with these. You can do a variety of subject matter. The subject that I chose for both of these is just kind of a good demonstrator because it's kind of like the very basics of when we teach atmospheric perspective and how we think about atmospheric perspective, where you start with more detail and you progress to less detail. And the main thing I wanted to do with this one is I wanted to paint a sunset, and I actually tried a few different methods of painting my sunset and kind of fixing it and adjusting it and that sort of thing. But I thought having a really vivid sky in the background would help draw the eye all the way to the back of the piece. So that was kind of what I was going for with this. You could even break this project up and have these as like individual cards that you then display in sequence and kind of space them out. You could even turn this into like a prop design and or a Mardi Gras float option and have it really big. This kind of like layered landscape can be used in a variety of ways, and it was really fun to play around with this, especially because it's like landscapes but in more of like a booklet or a zine format. And I enjoyed doing this so much that I would love to offer this as like a pre-printed zine on my table. I just haven't figured out how to print it because like double-sided printing is not my strong point, so I'm still kind of figuring out how I want to do that. And there's a few different ways that you can handle doing the mountains. I'm doing like wet into wet layers for this one rather than doing kind of individual colors. This will also work. So what you do is like kind of the reverse. Instead of adding more water as you go, you are saturating your paint with each subsequent layer and allowing each layer to dry in between. Again, though, you don't have to do this in watercolor. You can do this in whatever media you like and whatever you enjoy. I'm just using watercolor because that's the medium that I happen to really like. I had students who did this project with water-based markers, and it turned out really cute. I had students who did this with alcohol markers, and it turned out really cute. This would be a good one for color pencils. With the watercolor, you just want to make sure that you have weights to kind of help support it, because as you guys can see, the paper will kind of bow from the water, and you can flatten it in a book, but you know, if it bows too much or if it warps too much, you may not get the fold as nice as you might want it to be. So that is just something to kind of keep in mind. A lot of the thought process is pretty much the same from the first zine, where we're working from like warm greens to cool greens, and we're working from more detail, like you see me masking out the butterflies and the flowers, to less detail. I'm instead going to talk about teaching in person. So if you guys don't know me, hi, hello, welcome. I'm Becca Hilburn. I'm a gig teacher. So I have a master's degree in sequential art, which is comics, and I have taught at all kinds of places. I have taught at middle schools. I have taught at elementary schools. I've taught at charter schools. I've taught at public schools. I have taught high school level. I have taught college level. I have taught at anime conventions across the country. I have taught at comic cons, and I teach currently mostly with libraries. And each of the, and I've taught community education, and each of these brings different challenges. And I really do enjoy challenges, and I like figuring out my students and working to find teaching styles that meet their needs and meet their interests. And I like developing tutorials and lessons and projects kind of unique to my students, or unique to the situation, or unique to their interests. That's something that I enjoy. And that's something that gig teaching offers that kind of flexibility for. I have been teaching for over 10 years now. It feels kind of, it's more like 15, longer than 15 actually. And I actually started student teaching when I was still an undergrad, getting my first degree. So I come from a family of teachers. My aunt was a kindergarten teacher. My mother was a math teacher for 20 years. And I always told myself I wasn't going to teach. And I don't know. I love art so much that I wanted to share it with other people. And I felt frustrated at how art is often taught in schools. And I'm a very drawing heavy person. I'm a very storytelling heavy person. I like animals. I like plants. I like people. Those are the kind of things I like to teach. I like teaching narrative art. And that's not really something that's mostly done in schools unless you're in like an illustration program or you're in a comics or a picture book program. So I wanted to be able to share my very expensive graduate school education with people. I wanted to make art more accessible. I wanted more people to feel confident in picking up art. So I also started teaching art online. And I started by participating. Well, I started with a blog that I kept all through grad school, and I talked about the exercises we did and the conventions I went to and like the drawing exercises I was working on and all kinds of things. And I was also sharing that on Twitter at the same time and sharing resources and stuff. And then I participated in the Sequel Lab podcast while I was at SCAD, and that was educational as well because we were talking a lot about making comics and our comic experiences and going to conventions. And then I started teaching again through SCAD, participating in various programs like that, and trying to get experience, but also learning how to work with people. And art can be, in fact, one of the things I think art should be is a very customer service kind of job. We are working with people to solve their problems. We are working with people to create things that they could imagine but couldn't bring to life into their own hands. We're working with people to create something collaborative that is better than just them working by themselves and us working by ourselves. And I think that is something that working with a human artist is always going to bring to the table. There is going to be the potential for so much more than what you might have come up with by yourself. And this is probably why, as discouraging as being an artist in 2025 is, as discouraging as being an artist in the South is, I'm probably going to continue being an artist, and I'm probably going to continue teaching art until I am just so burnt out and disabled that I cannot anymore. Talking about teaching is relevant because this was a project requested by my employer to teach to a class of adults and older teenagers. And I'm really glad that she suggested it. I'm really glad that I had the opportunity to play around with this. I'm really glad I got paid to do this. And I'm really glad that I got to share it with other people, and I got to help answer their questions, and I got to help explain things, and I got to help demonstrate things. It's something that I genuinely enjoy in life, and that I hope I can continue to make available and accessible to people. These little watercolor landscapes, and they don't have to be watercolor, you could do them. I thought about doing it in alcohol marker, and I just went with watercolor because I don't know how many of my alcohol markers are currently dead and dried out, but I do know my watercolors work. But you could do these with anything. They are really fun to do. They are very cute. They could make wonderful little cards to send to somebody, or just like cute art to display. I also think these could make very cute short zines if you wanted to. So these are my two finished folding landscapes. I did have a beach scene that I just never got around to finishing. I like them both. I think they both turned out very cute. I did want to try some slightly different things with them where I cut so on this one I cut the hinge on the outside, and I found that it does fold a little bit better. This one I goofed and I cut the hinge on the inside. I just wasn't thinking. So but basically when I'm thinking of color, I'm thinking of warm in the foreground and cool in the background, and I tried to keep that consistent for both of these. And depending on how narrow you want to make these, you can get more folds. So like if you went with the long one like this and you made it like, half as narrow, you could definitely get a lot more folds in. So that's just something to keep in mind, but I had fun making these. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope to see you guys again soon. If you are looking for more videos on drawing environments, landscapes using watercolor, or atmospheric perspective, make sure you check the links in the description below. I'll also have the materials that I use for this project linked out for you guys over there. Thank you guys so much for joining me today, and I hope to see you guys again soon. If you need a step-by-step of this project, I did share the presentation that I created with my patrons over on Patreon, so you can find that at patreon.com/natosoup, and your support helps me continue to make videos just like this one. This project was created and taught to Art Lab, which is an art group here in Southeast Louisiana, hosted by the St. Charles Parish Public Library. So they also help fund the creation of tutorials like this one, and I greatly appreciate it. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you guys again soon. Bye, guys!